Hey everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel, where I cover all things about flame-worked glass. A few weeks ago, I posted a query on Instagram that challenged you to ask me anything. Well, I got so many responses that I had a lot of trouble deciding which questions I should answer. But I ended up picking the 10 that I felt were the most interesting. And so this video is my answer to those 10 questions. Our first question comes from Aaron Rhodes at Raleigh Glass Factory. One of your pieces inspired me many years ago to get into flameworking. Is there a flameworking artist or piece that inspired or influenced your early Boro pieces? Well, that's a great question, Aaron. If I had to pick just one, it would have to be Hans Godo Frabel of Atlanta, Georgia, in my early years. It was his work that first showed me the true potential of borosilicate glass. Godo was a very famous guy in the 1970s, and his work was renowned all over the world. When I was just starting out, I was making mostly little spun glass doodads, along with some small solid animals. I happened to see a Frabel catalog depicting some of his magnificent sculptural pieces: wild horses running across a piece of granite, a hammer and a nail, a dripping water faucet, and many others. I was stunned. At the time, I knew nothing of glass art outside my experience making little dust catchers. I remember thinking, what am I doing? Well, it changed everything for me, realizing what could be done with this beautiful material. I began attempting to make my own original work after that. By this, I mean that instead of trying to execute an established design the way my teacher did it, and with the only goal to achieve his level of quality, I tried to imagine what could be made, and then I tried to make it. From Godo, I learned that inventing my own designs was the way to go. Perhaps no other artist had a greater influence on me than Ginny Ruffner. Ginny's work was really different from anything I had ever seen back in the late 80s, and I was stunned to learn that she also worked in borosilicate glass, just like I did. Ginny broke all the rules. Her work was funky and narrative in a way that I thought was really different and exciting. Ginny painted on her glass, which was not generally accepted at the time by Boro artists as good practice, but made perfect sense for Ginny since she had an art degree in painting. But her imagery was so interesting and compelling that I was really inspired. Ginny taught me to think outside the box. Another name I always mention when asked about people who have influenced me is Paul Stankert. I met Paul at Penland in 1986 when I signed up for his class. I thought I was taking a class on how to make glass paperweights, but Paul seemed much more interested in taking nature walks and having discussions about creativity. At first I resented this, but eventually I realized that he was really sharing the important stuff with those walks and discussions. As he stated at the time, anyone can show you how to encase a flower in glass. You don't need me for that. From Paul, I learned personal vision, artistic integrity, and heard from him firsthand about the spiritual nature of the creative process. I was forever changed after that class. It took me years before I felt I found my own true voice, but he was the one that set me on the path. To this day, Paul and I remain friends, and he will forever have my gratitude and respect. Our next question comes via Facebook from Chris Tofferson. Chris Tofferson asks, how did the art world accept your transition into the taboo pipe maker's world? And after many collaborations, have you improved your skill set or learned anything working with these self-taught, very hidden, world-unknown artists? What is your takeaway of the people and the whole experience? Thanks for your question, Chris. Before I started making pipes, I admired what the pipers were doing. But I never imagined that one day I would be involved with making pipes myself. My criticisms of pipes 20 years ago were mainly that the artists lacked sophistication and tended to be somewhat derivative of each other. It was sometimes difficult to tell who had made a piece because they all employed similar color techniques, and confined to the format of a few types of pipes, they all tended to look somewhat alike. This all changed, of course. I started in 2011 during what I saw as a blossoming of artistic content in glass pipes. I still remember Salt and Kevin Ivey telling me that my style and my ideas would translate perfectly into the pipe format, and that I would become an instant, as they put it, ninja. I was skeptical, but once I decided to take the plunge, I realized that I had made a life-changing decision, one that I have never regretted. I learned more in the next 10 years than I had in the previous 30. My skills as a glassworker increased exponentially. My enthusiasm for my medium, which had lagged in recent years, exploded. It was like being reborn. I made pipes almost exclusively for the next 13 years and achieved my goal of becoming a skilled pipe maker. I will forever be grateful to the pipe community for welcoming me, for encouraging me, and for collaborating with me. During those 13 years, I did everything I could to show my gratitude. I did get a minimal amount of pushback from my longtime fellow glass artists, but I defended the pipe community fiercely to those who persisted in denigrating them. I promoted glass pipes as a legitimate art movement tirelessly to the people I had access to, but the pipers did not. I did my best to share my knowledge freely since I was learning so much. I felt then, and I still feel now, that sharing knowledge is the key to success for the industry as a whole, and I will continue to do so for the rest of my life.
Our next question comes again from Facebook from two different people. From Clarky Clark, how did you get into Blender to prototype designs? Is there a simple way to do it, or is it something that takes time to learn? From Mel Griffith, I've been a fan of your ray tracing art from the first time I encountered it many years ago. As someone who enjoys 3D modeling as well as making realistic paintings, I think I understand your transition to glassblowing, but could you please expand upon your experience with these different media?
Well, thank you both for an excellent question. I've been using computers for more than 30 years now and have from the very beginning been interested in computer graphics. The ray-traced images that Mel is referring to were my first attempt at photorealistic images generated by a computer and were made way back in the mid-1990s when computers were much slower and not nearly as powerful as they are today. So the transition to Blender about 3 years ago was a natural one for me. I guess I'm just a computer nerd at heart. Blender is a 3D modeling and rendering program that is open source freeware. It doesn't cost users a penny. It's a highly sophisticated app that is capable of amazing things. Yes, the learning curve can be steep. It certainly was for me. But Blender as a design tool does not require all the complex modeling and rendering tools it has to offer. Basic modeling and application of materials, specifically images, is actually pretty simple and easy to learn. So Blender can be learned fairly quickly if this is all you intend to use it for. I'll leave a link in the description below to download Blender. In the absence of a 3D program such as Blender, every artist should at the very least have a sketchbook with them at all times. Your sketchbook is where you rough out your seed ideas. Every artist needs to learn basic drawing skills. While I enjoy Blender as a design tool, knowing how to draw is more important and certainly more accessible. I usually recommend the book Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain as an important resource for anybody who wants to learn to draw. I've placed a link in the description below to this book. One of the revelations in Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain is that anyone can learn to draw, because drawing is not necessarily a skill you learn in your hands the way glass is. It's a skill you learn in your mind. You just have to learn how to see properly to be able to draw competently. If you can write your name legibly, you can learn to draw. So learn to draw first and then try Blender. Our next question comes from Jason Kimmel via Facebook. He asks, are flashback arresters necessary, or are they overkill that may be dangerous? Flashback arresters themselves are not dangerous, but they do prevent two types of potentially catastrophic events from happening: flashbacks and backfires. A backfire is the ignition of gases inside the torch. This can be caused by bumping a lighted torch into something, extinguishing the flame, and forcing the combustion back inside the torch itself. Needless to say, this is very dangerous. Not only can a backfire destroy the torch very quickly, but it can lead to the second dangerous event, a flashback. A flashback is where the internal flame travels all the way back to the tank, potentially causing a catastrophic explosion. Arresters prevent both of these events from happening, so they are recommended for glassworkers and welders. However, they may not be absolutely necessary, depending on what they are connected to. Here's why. There are two types of oxygen gas burners: premix and surface mix. Premix burners combine the two gases internally and then ignite them at the tip. Surface mix burners keep the two gases separate until they exit the tip, where they are ignited at the surface. Flashback and/or backburn can happen easily with premix burners because the combustible mixture is inside the torch, but it rarely happens with surface mix burners. So, if you have a premix burner attached anywhere to your incoming feed lines, flashback arresters are a sensible safety measure. All the varieties of mini torches, the National Hand Torch, the Smith Little Torch, the Arnold Hand Torch, and the Carlisle Hand Torch, for instance, are all premix burners. Even the surface mix Carlisle CC and CC Plus burners have premix center flames. But Herbert Arnold Zeniths, GTT torches, and Bethlehem burners are all surface mix. If they are on a feed line by themselves, flashback arresters may not be necessary. That said, if you believe in erring on the side of safety, install the arresters. There's no harm in it. Our next question comes from Jim Rugfind via Facebook. Do you ever have trouble coming up with ideas of what to make? And how do you overcome this? Well, Jim, every artist or writer experiences some level of artist block. You want to work, you need to work, but somehow the ideas just won't come. It's very common. Often it might just be that you need a break away from the torch to sort of reset. Other times it might be that you're preoccupied with some other aspect of your life that is challenging you. There's no one solution that will work for everyone. I would start by trying to clear out space in your day, as well as in your head, when you have nothing else more important that you have to think about. You can develop a routine for this. A little morning walk or jog around the block might do the trick. Listen to some good music and clear your head. Visualize coming to the end of the day, excited about opening the kiln the next day to see what you made. Then go to your bench and light the torch. Pick up a piece of glass and start melting it. Marvel at what an amazing material glass is, and try to keep your mind open. Often, ideas will come in a flash, and you'll have to stop what you're doing and immediately try to grab a hold of it. Other times, it takes a little patience. Try not to get frustrated or down on yourself, because these things are not conducive to creative thinking. Trust your inner self, and you won't let yourself down. You should also be prepared to embrace failure. Bold ideas are never the easy ones. Failure is an inevitable consequence of exploration and invention. Never be afraid to strike out in a new direction. Maintain a positive, go-for-it attitude, and you will often be rewarded with surprising successes. This next question comes via Instagram from my friend Direct Glass. He asks, Is it necessary to anneal a piece again after it's been sandblasted? Well, based on my understanding of the thermodynamics of glass, the answer is no. Glass undergoes stress when it is heated unevenly. But cold glass is extremely stable, especially if it has already been properly annealed. Cold glass has to be heated in excess of 910 degrees Fahrenheit to reintroduce stress that would require re-annealing. Sandblasting the surface of a piece does not introduce that kind of a temperature change. This is an old myth that I have refuted many times. I believe it came from another curious dynamic of glass, its skin. Glass is unique among solid substances in that, due to its non-crystalline molecular structure, it gains much of its inherent strength from its skin. The thin layer of molecules that compromise its surface damage the skin, and the glass is notably weaker at the point of damage. That's why you scratch a rod to break it into two pieces. When you sandblast a piece of glass, you're tearing off the entire skin, and that makes the glass considerably more fragile than it was before. Re-annealing it won't fix this. But if the glass is thick enough or has other forms of structural integrity, sandblasting is okay. Etch decorations are as old as glass itself, but if the glass has not been properly annealed, stripping off the skin allows the glass to fault along the stress lines much more easily. You should never sandblast an unannealed piece of glass. If cracks appear in your work after sandblasting, the problem is improper annealing, not sandblasting. For a more thorough explanation of the properties of glass, please watch my video, Understanding Glass and Heat. There's a link to it in the description. Our next question comes from Facebook, from my friend Eva Shelley. She asks, what are some good craft shows to apply for? Well, I chose this question because there's really no way to answer it objectively. Selecting art and crafts fairs that are right for you depends on many variables, so I'll answer this question by breaking down some of the most important of these, so you'll be able to select shows that you think will be right for you. I will add a list of resources that might help at the end. Juried or unjuried? A juried show is screened by a jury. The artist has to apply and show images of their work and most likely their display. The idea is that the show maintains a certain level of quality this way, which allows the public to have confidence that the artists in the show are professionals and that the work is high quality. Unjuried shows are therefore generally lower quality shows where all manner of handicrafts, imports, and other questionable exhibitors may be included. The advantage of a non-juried show is that you are sure to get in, as long as you pay your booth fee on time. For the juried show, there is no such guarantee. You are subject to the sometimes unpredictable whims of the jury. The best shows sometimes will have a very low ratio of accepted artists to applicants, so getting in is a big deal. If your livelihood depends on participating in a particular show, it can be devastating not to be accepted. The juried shows are where the real money is, so they are the ones you likely want. You just have to take your chances with the jury. So take good photos of your work. Indoor or outdoor? Most arts and craft shows are outdoor, but some are indoor. The two types have very different requirements. Indoor shows require lights. Outdoor shows do not. Indoor shows will often provide security so that you don't have to pack up all your work at the end of each day. Outdoor shows do not. Outdoor shows are subject to the weather and require that each artist provide their own portable shelter. Indoor shows are not and do not require a tent. Most artists have a preference for one type over the other, and so you'll have to decide which type is best for you. When I did shows, I always seemed to do better at indoor shows rather than outdoor shows, and really appreciated the security and lack of weather issues. so they were my preference. Wholesale or retail? Most outdoor arts and crafts fairs are retail. I put that word in quotes because many shows draw a public buyer that believes that an outdoor show is the place to shop for bargains. Whether or not the artist is able to sell for full retail, they are responsible for state sales tax. States tend to monitor the artists at these shows closely, so it likely does not pay to try to fudge the numbers to fool them. This is complicated by the public buyer who may want the artist to include sales tax, which simply means it comes out of their pocket. Retail sales can be very lucrative at a good show, and the thrill of returning home with a pocket full of money is addictive. But that also means that your show inventory must be replenished before the next show, and the only time to do that is between shows. If an artist books a busy season with shows every weekend for a number of months, you can see how they could very easily get burned out. Wholesale shows are completely different. These shows are not open to the public, so you won't be dealing with large crowds. Only qualified wholesale buyers are allowed to attend. At a wholesale show, the artist displays samples from which the buyers place orders. The artist will pack up all of their work at the end of the show and take it home. Orders are then filled in the time frame agreed upon with the buyer. Obviously, sales tax is not an issue at this type of show, but the artist is expected to agree to about a 50% price reduction off their full retail. The advantage is that in a single wholesale show, an artist can book several months of production, eliminating the need to replenish inventory in a tight time frame, as well as only incurring a single show's worth of travel expenses. After 10 years of doing street art fairs during the 1980s, I turned to wholesale shows and did them exclusively throughout the 1990s. Even at half price, I earned much more money than I ever did during retail street shows. Local or out of state? Arts and crafts shows require that you travel to them to attend. Obviously, the further you have to travel, the higher the cost. If the show is only an hour from your home, you can save money by driving home each night instead of eating in restaurants or staying in motels. But if you cannot drive home, you are looking at significant expenses for lodging and meals, in addition to the jury and entry fees you have already paid. It's important to have confidence that your sales will cover these expenses easily, with more for profit, or else it does not make sense to attend the show. Therefore, the further you have to travel, the higher quality show you need to attend. Most artists schedule a combination of local and out-of-state shows throughout the year. Since regions usually have show seasons, it makes sense to schedule a string of shows in a location during that area's season. When I did the show circuit in the 1980s, I did the Florida circuit in the winter and traveled up north to shows for the summer. It was a grueling way to make a living. High-end or low-end? It is vital to select shows that give you the best opportunity to sell your work. Some shows are more high-end and some shows are more medium or low-end. So it makes some sense to be able to have some idea if your work suits the preferences of the attending public. There can be nothing more frustrating than watching everyone around you making sales while you are not, because your price points don't fit the preferences of the buying public. You don't want to be too high or too low. There's definitely a big fish in a little pond or a little fish in a big pond dynamic. You want to be just the right size fish for just the right size pond. There are publications that are devoted to rating arts and crafts shows, and they are a great source of information. They compile reports from artists who attend the shows to try to give an overview of that show's buying potential so that you can make an informed choice of whether that show is right for you. Beyond that, it's simply learning by trial and error. I have placed some links to a few best shows lists, along with a list of websites that have information about craft shows in the description below. Our next question comes via Instagram from @timidmoth. He asks, one of the many issues glass artists struggle with is obtaining and keeping studio space. In your experience, do you have any advice for people? What the property should look like, the type of zoning, grants or other endowments that might help pay for it, and in general, any other techniques that will help smooth the process of ownership or rent? Thank you for the great question. If you opt for an industrial space, you should have few problems. A glassworker is like a welder and will be treated by landlords and lending institutions as such. An industrial space will likely have concrete floors, high ceilings, block walls, the proper zoning, and are generally well suited for glass blowing. You'll need to clear whatever build-out you require with your landlord, of course, but industrial spaces are designed for that type of thing, so it should not be a problem. The real issue comes when you decide you want to work at home. And who doesn't want that? This is the age-old dilemma of the self-employed. Only for glass artists, it's much worse because, fire. Rentals can be extremely problematic because no landlord wants to risk burning down his investment property when he could just as easily have a nice little old lady and her tiny dog instead. That said, it's not impossible. I myself started out in rented homes, so I have some experience in this regard. Even if you own your own home, chances are that you share ownership of that home with a bank or other financial institution that holds your mortgage. Their interest in their investment is not much different than a rental home's landlord, in that they are not likely to take kindly to fire hazards. So how do you deal with the issue? Working from your home, whether you rent or own, mainly requires that you keep your business footprint very small. No industrial-sized glass studio for you. Make it look like a hobby, not a manufacturing business. If you are renting, it's best to make sure the owner is fully informed of your little enterprise and assured that you are competent and know what you're doing. Show him your work and setup, complete with the anti-fire measures you take: fire extinguishers, fireproof working surfaces, UL-approved appliances such as kilns and burners, etc. Show him your work. Give him a nice piece. If you cannot sell him by being friendly and honest, you likely don't want him as a landlord anyway. If you own your home, the situation is much the same. But banks are actually a little tougher, since you'll be dealing with an agent who has to follow rules, and so the same sort of personal approach may not work as well. I've always just kept it to myself before closing. Never asked permission, right? That said, for every home I have owned where I worked at home, I housed the studio in a separate standalone building with its own electric feed, not in the garage or spare room. So when I shop for a new home, the first thing I look for is a nice outbuilding. Schlepping around propane tanks gets old fast, so you likely want to establish an account with your local gas service. To get gas delivered, you'll have to adhere to some fairly strict rules about your plumbing and torches. Following these rules is the best insurance you can have. Getting oxygen delivered is another toughie. High-volume systems are the best and solve all the problems, but if you can't afford a high-volume system and you don't want to schlep the tanks around yourself, you'll need to make sure the welding company is allowed to drive their trucks into your neighborhood. When shopping for homes, you need to keep these factors in mind. I think it's pretty clear that an urban or suburban residence can present many more problems than a rural one. Proximity of neighbors is an important factor. A nice buffer between you and your nearest neighbor will greatly reduce the severity of many issues. I have found that, in general, rural people are more laissez-faire than urban people. So I strongly suggest an older rural home. They're generally less expensive than newer urban homes and much more likely to have large outbuildings. Zoning should always be checked. Here in Florida, I always look for AU zoning, which means rural agricultural. In that type of zoning, you're most likely outside of the city limits and not subject to many regulations that a city may impose. Counties tend to be much more tolerant. The final issue is insurance. This is an impossible problem here in Florida, So I might add here that Florida is not such a good place to move to right now if you want to set up a glass shop at home. No insurance company will cover you or the building you set up in. Full stop. You just have to accept the risk. Other states might not be so difficult, but they could be very expensive. Taking out a private liability policy might do the trick, but they do not come cheap. So shop carefully. Make sure that everything you need to run your business is in place before you sign anything. And budget in the hidden costs of insurance and building to code so you know what you're getting into. I am not aware of any grants or endowments that will specifically fund a private art studio. That said, there are grants programs out there that you may want to look into, but I'm not an expert on them. I've heard of artists funding their studio using crowdfunding, like GoFundMe or Indiegogo. But again, my knowledge of these platforms is very limited, and I can only suggest that you do your own research. I've placed links to these two sites in the description. Our next question comes via Facebook from Jason Brandon Gam. Jason asks, do you think it is possible for the next young generation, say 18 to 22 or so, to have a successful career in glass, given the economic challenges that they face? Even when the economy was excellent, it was still very difficult. But for them, it seems like a much more difficult situation. If yes, how do you recommend they go about getting started and eventually moving up the ladder in this unforgiving landscape? Well, thank you, Jason, for a great question. I'm not sure I agree with you that the situation is all that dire, but I understand where you're coming from. I don't think it matters much how old you are, as much as it matters if you truly believe glass is the career for you. And while the golden age of glass pipes may be over, the materials, tools, and general knowledge that is available makes learning glass as easy as it has ever been. That said, it is still not without significant obstacles. The current economy is certainly not conducive to effortless sales. But the love of glass art is as strong as ever in this country. It will just take more than starting an Instagram account to find an effective marketing strategy. Before marketing, a young glassworker will need good original designs to sell. This is no simple task, but it is one that all artists, no matter what their medium, have to face on a daily basis. In a very real way, pipes partially solve this problem by providing a specific context that all new designs had to adhere to. That context served as a kind of a security blanket where glass artists felt safe and free to design pretty much anything as long as it fit the context. But without that context, the choices available can either seem overwhelming or non-existent. This is why it's important for any new artist to educate themselves about the broader art community, not just glass pipes and not just glass. Read about art and art history. Go to art shows and art museums. Develop an interest in other artists' work in glass as well as in other mediums. Try to pay attention to what works and what does not. Every artist has to develop a personal vocabulary that expresses their true self, and that may be the most important advice of all. Be true to yourself. A well-developed personal vision would be an excellent replacement for the secure context once provided by glass pipes. Every artist has to learn a subset of skills to be successful. Examples of these adjacent skill sets include budgeting and accounting, photography and computer graphics, basic design and color theory, drawing and public speaking, just to name a few. Many who struggle as artists neglect their development in these skill sets, so I always recommend doing whatever it takes to learn them. Fortunately, there are endless resources available, especially online, that make learning easier than ever. My advice is to start learning early. You will be tested sooner than you think, whether you do or not. Best to learn the easy way than the hard way. Marketing is the really tough one. There are pipe makers who built their entire careers with Instagram as their only marketing tool. But I think everyone agrees now that Instagram no longer provides the art community with what they need to market their work. Fortunately, there are many ways to market artwork. Each artist has to find the way that works best for them. Going over all the options in detail would require much more time than I have here in this video. But there are online resources where information is available for all of these options. They include arts and crafts shows, wholesale market shows, as well as online markets such as Etsy, Big Cartel, and Artful Home. Each of these has their pros and cons, and all of them require a lot of hard work. But if your passion is strong and you really want this, the opportunities are there. The last question for today comes via Facebook from my friend James Stanford. James asks, what is the most impactful advice you received as an artist, aspiring or already well-respected, that resonates with you and comes to mind frequently when you approach a new project? Well, that's a great question. I've received so many bits of advice from so many different people. It's difficult to narrow it down to just one. So here's a short list. Keep it simple. It's so easy to get carried away with glass that we tend to overdo it sometimes. But art is poetry, not prose. You don't have to show or describe every aspect of the image or idea you are trying to present. Very often, less is more. Be mysterious, and people will be more engaged. Tell a story. Glass as a medium is ideal for narrative work. Instead of just making a thing, present the thing in a context that allows or encourages the viewer to participate. You want your viewer to engage. The real magic happens in the space between the art and the viewer. Cultivate surprises. Nothing makes an artwork more memorable than an unexpected element or surprise. Don't be afraid to play around with your idea. The more off the wall, the better. Sometimes the best ideas are born out of the unlikely or unexpected. Learn to anticipate and act upon your weirdest ideas. Work in series. Sometimes an idea cannot be fully developed in the first attempt. If a new work resonates with you, it might be likely that you immediately want to make it again. But don't try to repeat the same piece. Allow it to be something new. These sorts of variations cannot happen without making the previous pieces. Series are an important part of any artist's body of work. Work to live. Don't live to work. If all you ever do is blow glass, you'll eventually burn out. Your work quality and your productivity will be harmed. Take time for other activities. Recreation is good. Family is better. Life is short, and it's simply not constructive to sacrifice the important stuff for a few more hours of work time. Be true to yourself. You can fool anybody, but you cannot fool yourself. If your work is sincere, you'll love it no matter what anyone else says. So make choices and create imagery that appeals to you, that speaks to you, and that you consider to be important. Money is a strong motivator, but if you just create for money, the work will not be sincere or significant. Trying to appeal to money can actually be counterproductive. Chasing money is like chasing butterflies. If you just stop running around flailing for 1 second, it might just come over to you and land on your shoulder. And that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed my first 10 questions video. There will be more. If you have any questions or comments, please add them to the comments below. If your question is a good one, I may add it to the list for the next 10 questions video. Until then, as always, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Tell your friends about this place and come back often. I'll see you all next time.